I think
Here we go.
Kip's the presentation. That's okay. That's perfect. I'm sacrificing a bit of the presentation to give you the pleasure of this long. It's not too long, it's under 2 minutes.
The Blaydon Races was on the 9th of June, 1962 in the summer's afternoon. Took the bus for Bachelors, and she was heavy laden, and away we went in our color seats that got the road to Blaydon. No, that you should have seen us cannon, past the books upon the road, just as all was done. There was lots of lads and lasses there, I was 5 and years, cannon and I just run, but oh, you see the Blaydon Races.
Should do, I think. So I click the next one, hopefully I'll get the next slide, yeah. Who wants to play it all? Right. No, thank you, we've got that. That was nice and clear, actually. I wasn't sure whether you were going to get the gist of that. So what is Blaydon Races? Blaydon Races is also known as the Geordie anthem. Geordies are, I am a Geordie. A Geordie is a person who comes from Tyneside in northeast England. On the River Tyne, either side of the Tyne, but mostly to the north side in Newcastle. So I am a Geordie, and this is my anthem. Or it's called the Geordie Anthem. It's a song that was written in 1862 to celebrate a race that nearly didn't happen. And you'll get I'm going to go through small sort of chorus by verse so you can see what it was all about and why it matters to Geordies, basically. So this is my own heritage, it's my personal heritage, so to speak. Okay. Yes, come on, Miriam. Have another go. No, thank you. Thank you. Jumping 2 slides now. So you know where we are. This is the map of northeast England. You can see Newcastle there. You can see Sunderland, Hartlepool, Durham, the big county of Northumberland that's on the border with Scotland, and various other places that are important. There's 2 things I'd like to point out. Hopefully, don't know whether my pointer will work on screen. This is a pointer as well, isn't it? Which button do I press for the pointer? The red. Okay. Is it that way? That's right, way around. Okay. So one of the things I want to point out, this is a song about a race. The Darley Arabian and the Bailey Turk were both at stud on the Yorkshire-Durham border. I think it's worth knowing that. I strongly make the case, you'll be hearing more about this later, for horse racing and the birth of the thoroughbred being in northeast England, which is something that's been overlain by other kinds of history. But that's not really what I want to focus on today. That'll be coming later on in the Galloway talk. But yes, racing is part of northern history and northern tradition. This is where the thoroughbred racehorse came from, in the Yorkshire-Durham border, and mainly around a place called Middleham. So that's kind of one of the important things to know, that not a lot of people know that, as the saying goes. So Blaydon Races is essentially a comic song. And the thing about Geordies is that we find humour even in the worst of conditions. Geordie Ridley was the author of Blaydon Races. And as you can see, he lived a very short life. He wasn't even 30 when he died. He was born in Gateshead, which is now Tyne and Wear, on Tyneside, but on the south bank of the Tyne. He worked as a miner, as so many people did in those days. He was seriously injured in an underground accident when a wagon, horse-drawn wagon, crushed him. be drawing a line of wagons underground in the pit, and it left him with permanent disabilities. So he learnt to perform to earn a living. He became a very popular songwriter and performer, and Eric Burdon of the Animals, you've probably heard of him, is his great nephew. So music obviously runs in the family. So very short, sad life in lots of ways, but it's a very jolly comic song. That's exactly what it's intended to be. So the chorus, which you heard singing at the beginning there, "Army lads," or "Army lads, you should have seen us ganning. We passed the folk along the road." It's probably a lot easier to understand when you see the words up there. "Just as they were standing, there was lots of lads and lasses there, all with smiling faces, ganning along the Scotswood Road to see the Blaydon Races." So I think you'll probably see, there's one thing that's worth pointing out there, and that's the kind of the Germanic Norse roots of Geordie, ganning. Yeah, you'll find this in Scots as well, especially Southern Scots. It's actually the oldest form of English was Old Northumbrian, and all English derives from Old Northumbrian. And you maybe heard the man start singing, "We took the bus from Bamfraz." That R sound is very traditional Northumbrian, and it's dying out now. There's very few people do that Bamfraz thing. So it's quite lovely to hear it from that recording of getting on for 100 years ago, I think now. So the song is about a trip to the races, and they're ganning along Scotswood Road, which is a long road in Newcastle, very famous road. It was famous for its industry. It runs parallel to the banks of the Tyne, where there's shipbuilding and locomotive building and all sorts of things going on there. Highly industrial area, and also surrounded by masses of slum housing where the workers live. And they were slums. I'll show you how much of slums they were in a bit. Okay, so this is what it's all about. It's a trip to the races, simple as that, Blaydon. Blaydon is on the south bank of the Tyne, and it was on the map, but perhaps not very visible on it. Right, so this is Scotswood Road, an old photo of Scotswood Road. So much of it has been cleared away now, and new housing built, new blocks of flats. There was a massive slum clearance in the 1960s. But this is very typical of the housing that was there. This photograph was taken as part of the survey for the slum clearance in the 1960s. This is all relevant to the story, by the way. So the kind of people who were going to the races, this is not your Ascot or your one of the big posh events in Southern England. This is an event for local people with a bit of money in their pockets to spend on their day out, ordinary people. Now, can you see this photo on the right here? I'm going to probably shock you in a minute. You can see that it's kind of very old-fashioned housing with there's a long flight of stone steps. If I tell you that's not one house but two, that's two Geordie flats, an upstairs and a downstairs, right? And there's yards for both at the bottom, and outside there would be a toilet and probably a coal shed for your coal. Okay, I'll put another image of it up here so you can see it more closely. I spent the formative years of my life between the ages of 9 and 10 in the upstairs part of one of those flats, of those houses. I remember the flight of stone stairs. We didn't live in Scotswood, but we lived in another part of Newcastle with identical housing. And I remember those long stone stairs. There's no electricity down there. There's no electricity in your outside toilet. So you can imagine what it's like going down if you suddenly need to go to the loo in the middle of the night in winter. It's not very pleasant, I can tell you. This was when my family was going through a very hard luck period after my father was made redundant. And so I understand poverty. You know, I know these people, these are my people. At one point in this flat, 4 rooms and a scullery, a little kitchen along the back there were 4 adults and 2 children under the age of 10. Okay. So there you go. I hope that shocked you. So in 1960 and 70, all this was being cleared away. And then some of them were still hanging on until the 1980s, well, I'm sure of that. And some of these areas, amazingly, have been gentrified, really. So, I mean, it makes me laugh to think that, you know, the place that I always called the slum flat is an area of gentrification. This is what the councils, the mainly socialist councils of the 1960s were dealing with. And they were, you know, what they replaced them with, like the high rises and stuff, came in for as much criticism as the Suns did. Okay, so I went to Blaydon Races, which was on the 9th of June. It's very important that you say June and not June, right? This is very important for local dialect. 1862 on a summer's afternoon. Afternoon is very important as well. I took the bus from Bambres, and she was heavy laden. Away we went along Collingwood Street, that's on the road to Blaydon. Now, all these are famous places to a Geordie. You know exactly what they're talking about, even though none of them exist anymore, you know. Bambres was a music hall, and it was a bar as well. So that was where you got on the bus in Westgate in Newcastle. And it's interesting, you notice that he says she about the bus. She was heavy laden, as if it was a ship or something. That's relevant too, because all along the road, as they're going along the Scotswood Road to the races, is shipbuilding and locomotive works. And they mostly belonged to one man whom we shall meet very shortly. We flew past Armstrong's factory and up to the Robin Adair. Just gannon doon the railway bridge, the bus wheel flew off there. The lassies lost their crinolines off, and the veils that hide their faces. It's a really hard one to do, actually, in proper Geordie. Anyway, and I got 2 black eyes and a broken nose gannon to Blaydon Races. So they all fall out of the bus, basically. And it's a horse-drawn bus, remember, it would be a horse-drawn bus in 1862. So that's this is what happens. They haven't even got there yet, and it's already a blanket disaster, you know, but everyone would be laughing about it, because there would probably be a little bit of beer take. A little bit, yeah. Okay. So this is Lord Armstrong. Lord Armstrong, some of you may have heard of him. He was a mighty engineer, industrialist, an extremely wealthy man. His massive house at Cragside in Northumberland was the first place in England to have electricity. That was done, I think, by hydro. Yeah. So he kind of started that all. Like so many people from the Northeast, like the Stevensons, he was into engineering, and locomotives were a big thing for him. Planes, when they came along, shipbuilding, massive, and armaments, heavily into armaments. So a lot of the people that are on the bus probably worked for him. Okay. As the Robin Adair pub, not the original Robin Adair pub, but you can just see in the background there, in the top there, you can see that there's a horse-drawn bus, even on the new version. I don't think even this pub exists any longer. I think it's probably been knocked down and replaced with something else, but it's a while since I went down Scotswood Road. I'll rush you through the next 2 verses because they're not so much related to the races. We're still on the way to the races. This is all about on the way to the races. Yeah. We're turning it into a real adventure, you know, it's like an epic. The day we went to Blaydon Races. When we got the wheel put on, a while we went again. But then that had their noses broke, they came back our hiem. Hiem is the Geordie for home. Again, you can see the Germanic roots of that there, I think. Some went to the dispensary and others to Dr. Gibbs, who I think was a kindly man who used to treat the poor. And some sought out the infirmary to mend their broken ribs. But when we get to Paradise, that sounds lovely, doesn't it? Paradise is just a place at Scotswood Road. There was Bunnigan began. I think this is when the beer is really fine. There was 420 on the busman, and who they danced and sung. They called on me to sing a song. I sung them Paddy Fig, and I danced a jig and swung me twig that day I went to Blaydon. Now, what swinging your twig is, I don't know, except apart from the fact that the human body, I guess, looks a bit like a twig. So he's maybe talking about swinging his body half. But remembering that this is a man who's been injured in a pit accident, you know, that's kind of exceptional, really. Or he might just have been looking for a desperate rhyme for jig. You know, I mean, you never really quite know with these things. But we're still not there yet. Now, the next bit they get to is the Blaydon Chain Bridge, which also no longer exists because we've got a new one there. We flew across the chain bridge and into Blaydon Toon. The bellman, he was Carlin there. They call him Jackie Broon. I saw him tacken to some chips Chaps is how you'd say it, not chaps. And then he was persuaded to go and see Geordie Ridley's concert in the Mechanics Hall at Blaydon. Now, there's a turf historian called Ray Vamplew, and in one of his books, he says something to the effect that this isn't a traditional Geordie air or Geordie song. It's just a blatant advertisement for Geordie Ridley's show at the Mechanics Hall at Blaydon, and it is a bit really. But the Mechanics Hall is another important feature in the landmark, in the environment, so to speak, in the landscape, because the Mechanics Hall is a place of entertainment and education. The Mechanics Hall was where working class people would go to enjoy themselves, and it's also where they would go to educate themselves. Might very well have a library, you know, as well as doing entertainment like Geordie Ridley's show. Okay, so we finally get to the races. And this is a page, the painting as visualized by a local painter called William Irving. And some have said that this man at the front is supposed to be Geordie Ridley. I'm not sure whether that's actually the case or not. That one there coming out the picture at you. But you can see it's just a bit of a riot, really. We have a horse bus in the background there, bringing more people. We have the iron and steel work, the ironworks in the background there as well. We have tents and all sorts of going on. Absolutely thronging with people. But as you can see, the only horses are in the horse bus. The interesting thing about Blaydon Races is it hardly references horses at all. Really doesn't. But in the picture, we also have local characters, two women called Cushy Butterfield and War Nanny the Mazer. And they are two people who also had songs dedicated to them. Guess what? They were famous for drinking beer. Yes. And we also have in the background a chap in a big white hat there, riding a donkey, a cuddy. That's what we call them in North of England, a cuddy. I think that's supposed to be Coffee Johnny, but he's sometimes described as being that character as being something else in this picture. I think it's Coffee Johnny. You'll find out why shortly. But there's also masses of other local characters in there. Billy Lauder, the piper, they've all got funny names like Dapper Dan, and you know, everybody knew who they were local characters. And I think you've got the gist now that this race is just an excuse for a big day out, basically. I mean, people are hardly even bothered about the races, they're bothered about the rest of it, the sideshows. The rain it poured all the day and made the grounds quite muddy. It did that. Made. Coffee Johnny had a white hat on. They were shooting where stole the cuddy, who stole the donkey. There was spice stalls and monkey shows and outwives selling ciders, old women selling ciders, and a chap with a hackney roundabout carousel shooting noomy lads for riders. So I think again you've got the gist of this big working class day out. Now I'll go the point of this is that what the true story behind this song is that Geordie Ridley wrote it long before the event of the race. He wrote it the week before, or like 10 days or 2 weeks before. And he had to actually add this verse into it after the day of the event, 1862, in June, because there was the weather was indeed terrible. The Tyne rose, the water of the River Tyne rose, and the races that were being held on a island in the middle of the Tyne, the horses had to swim across from the north bank to it, and they had to wait for the river to go down before they could, and only a few horses made it through, and they had to have a certain number of horses make it through, otherwise it would never even have happened. And if that had happened, there really would probably have been a riot. So eventually the races went ahead, but it's a song celebrating something that very nearly didn't happen, and it's all the background to this, and it was written well in advance of the event. So Coffee Johnny, 1829 to 1900 character, 6'6" tall, blacksmith, bare knuckle fighter, a trumpeter in the Winleighton brass band, and he was adopted by a local couple, the father of 10 children. He's famous for one day at the local hunt, the daughter of the local squire, her horse went into the mud, founders into the mud, and Coffee Johnny is said to have gone into the mud and shouldered the horse out of it. That's the kind of reputation he had. He wasn't really a man that you would mix with, and you can still go and see his grave. I think his grave's in Willaiton churchyard, but he is probably the most famous character in the book. The Who Stole the Cuddy. Some say that white hats. He was famous for his white top hat, and some say that that's because white hats were made out of donkey skin, so they were kind of joshing him that he'd been catching donkeys and turning their skins into hats and so forth. But there are other reasons suggested for him having this white hat all the time. As for the coffee, apparently, if he was asked to, one version is if he was asked to do a job, he'd say, "Wait till I finish my coffee, man." Because everybody's a man on Tyneside. And you can even hear people, if they're exasperated, saying to one another things like, "How man, woman, man, woman, man." You know, because they're like saying, "How man, woman, man." It's really quite a very entertaining dialect, it's Geordie. Okay, so in 1962, 100 years after the event, the local council decided that as this anthem was so ingrained into the Geordie psyche, they were going to have a celebration of the 100th year. It was a massive, massive event. And as you can see, they managed to get a horse bus, not, maybe like the type they would have driven along Scotswood Road in 1862. I'm not sure, it would have been what they call these garden buses, yeah, up and down, I think, but I'm not sure it would have been that height. But there were also lots of other horses involved. There were the police horses, obviously. There were a few other examples of horse-drawn transport, and also lots of local vehicles out and about. They also